All right, today I'm here with Paul Burgess from Instinctive Drives. Paul's a good partner of Cloverleaf, and he is the creator of Instinctive Drives. Coming to us today from the land down under, so maybe you can talk a little bit about that as well, Paul. But we want to talk a little bit about not just Instinctive Drives, but more importantly, that raw natural self, the instinctive aspect of who we are, and how tapping into that can really help us be our best self. So I'll let you provide a little bit of background on who you are, Paul, and then let's jump right into it.
Hey, thanks a lot, Darren. It's nice to be here with you, and it's obviously been fun building our partnership together. So yes, this area of peak performance, people being at their best, people operating in stride. It's honestly been something that's fascinated me for probably 40 plus years. It's been a long time. I remember back when I was probably 10 or 11 years of age, as one of six children and three boys, as you say, growing up here in Sydney, Australia. We were all in the same bedroom, and I'd look at my brothers and I think we're all raised by the same parents, and yet we're so different. Why are we so different? And I don't know why I was fascinated more than anybody else, or more than certainly my brothers, about this. But I'd watch how we did things, and I just was staggered at how different we were. And when we started work, I mean, there were then all my fellow employees that I'd work with, and I'd see how different we were. And then I got into a financial planning business, and I sat around the table with four partners, and we make promises to each other about what we're going to get done in the next week or the next month. And I was as committed as anyone else, and yet you come back a week or whatever, a month later, and some of those things were just completely like slipped my mind or slipped their minds. And I'm like, there's a big difference between the intelligence that we have to commit and understand and say we're going to do something, and what actually happens, in terms of what plays out with our actions, our behaviors, our performance. And that conundrum was just something that fascinated me and set me on a search, about 30 years ago, which led ultimately to developing the whole ID system.
Well, your story about being 10 or 11 definitely resonates with me. I have 10-year-old twin girls right now.
Wow.
And, especially when you're talking about twins, right? Like
Yeah.
they're getting the exact same parents, right? It wasn't
Right.
3, 4, 5 years apart. They're both girls, right? So there's not gender differences involved in that. And they could not be more different from each other, right?
That's
So that parenting context or that family context. And then I commend you for being so interested in that topic at such a young age, because honestly, it's a hard time to peel my daughters away from the video screen right now
wow.
with their focus on YouTube. But it's cool that you were fascinated by that at such a young age.
Well, I did. I remember being fascinated, but I didn't do much about it until I was into the business partnership that I had. And when I saw us make commitments, and I remember one time coming back from being on leave, and my secretary cleaned up my desk, and it was really, really pretty impressive. And I remember promising myself, okay, I'm going to keep it like that, And within about 5 minutes, I had various phone calls coming in, and I stood up and looked at my desk, and it was back to the way it was before. And I'm like, what is that? Like 5 minutes ago, I completely committed to keep it clean and tidy. And then that just went straight out of my head. Once I got onto the client stuff, I was focused more on the clients, wasn't thinking about what is that. And so I just had this fascination with trying to understand what was happening, what I would have said naturally and automatically, I would now say instinctively, compared to what I thought I would do. And that difference between, instinct and intellect was what I get, and really through the centuries, there's been a lot of debate about how much of this is nature and how much is nurture. And that's sort of where I went as well. But what I found, Darren, was that in the 20th century, like as we're in the 1990s, 2000s, so much of the emphasis was on the nurture side because of the development of human resources, of personal development, human motivational, trainings and principles and so on. It was almost like we can be anything we want to be. We just need to want it bad enough and then get the right training and understanding, and we could shift. But I found that when you talk to people who are in their, the other end of their career, 60s, 70s, 80s, they'd say to me, yeah, you know what? I tried to change too. I tried to be more organized. I tried to be more of a people person. and in the end, it just sucked so much energy, and it wasn't me. I wasn't being true to me. And so I got the impression that there was a me element. There was this like almost like an inner self within us. And what most people were trying to do in their life's journey was to try and find what was that inner self, what was that true self part. And when people were then, they found out what that was and they were true to that, they're the people I found to be happiest and most successful. And the people who struggled with finding that or weren't true to whatever that was, they were the people I found to be eternally unhappy.
Yeah, it's such an interesting concept too, because, I think especially in corporate and work type environments, we don't often want to focus on the nature side of that, right? I think we, as organizations, we want to believe that, we have the ability to shape, or the opposite of that is we want everyone to conform, right, to a
Right.
certain way, right? And culture oftentimes for organizations can be more superficial, like I got to wear a lapel pin, or I've got to wear certain things, or
Right.
behave or
Yeah.
say certain things the way that I'm supposed to say it. So I think that's part of the reason why it's so easy for not just assessments, but just as we think about culture and management styles and approaches, that nature, we don't want to talk about that because it feels too personal. It feels like things that, we want to try to change things, as opposed to bending, roles or bending opportunities towards the natural strengths and talents of the people who are there. Um, so it's fascinating to me that you chose to really kind of dig in on that. And do you find that you meet resistance
Well,
with that because it gets too personal, or what's your
it wasn't.
perspective on
It
that?
wasn't so. I don't get as much resistance anymore because I guess I've got such a strong track record now of having done this for so long, and
Right.
people have got there's all of many sort of use cases around it. But back at the start, yes, absolutely, because it wasn't so much that it was too personal. It was that the phrase that I got from people. I remember going to see a professor of neuropsychology at Harvard University, and I was saying, look, here's where I'm at. This is what I'm thinking about. I'm seeing a lot of merit in the notion of instinct in people and the whole nature component rather than nurture. And he slapped my wrist, literally slapped my wrist, and said, stay away from that because it's too animalistic. We're human beings. We have an intellect. Yes, there is a nature part of who we are, but the intellect allows us to override that. We have the faculty of choice. And so if we choose not to do something or to do it, that's what we have as a faculty that puts us above all other animals in the food chain, that, is what makes us human. And I remember thinking, well, that all makes good, logical, intellectual sense. But when people that I talked to, went along with that for a period of time, were they happy? Were they successful? And did they ultimately come back to home base, which was their instincts? And that's what I found to be not only true, I found it to be what I call an absolute. It was true 100% of the time. So it's like one of those human laws, like, do you need to eat food? Yes, you do. Can you go without food for a day or two or a week? Yes, you can. But ultimately, you either come back to it or you die. And so, I found that that is true about the way we're wired to be as well. This natural element, instead of just being a small part of who we are, think of it like the sun in the universe. It's not just another planet. It is like the central massive planet that almost everything else revolves around. And so it is with our ID, or this natural element of what makes us tick. It's profound, it's powerful, and it's the part that we all need to be true to, if we're ultimately going to find true happiness and be our very best selves.
So you have a slide up here,
Right.
and I'm sure for people who have been watching for, I don't know, 5 or 10 minutes now, they're probably like, man, this looks fascinating. Tell me more about what this is and how it relates to our instincts or our natural self.
Well, I put this slide up, Darren, because if someone said to me, of all the slides you've ever developed, you can only ever use one slide ever again. What's the slide? This is the slide,
Oh, awesome.
And the reason I say that is because it represents basically everything we've just been talking about. And the green arrow straight up the middle of the page, that represents this force. I did it as an arrow because I wanted to be like a drive, a force. It's something within you as like an internal compass. So there's some people that do call it the true north. Find your true north. So this is the true north. This is your in stride. This is your in flow component. When people talk about being in flow, when you are being true to yourself, true to your ID, this natural element, what you get are the things at the top of that chart. So if you want to give your very best performance, which includes things like making great decisions, some people say, I just can't get anything wrong at the moment. It's like I've got the Midas touch. I'm making quick decisions. I'm making them more probably on instinct than I am on intelligence, but everything's working out. It's just been amazing. And conversely, there's other times where they're like, I can't spin a trick. It's taking longer. I'm not thinking properly. I'm more confused. I'm making decisions. They're not always working out. I just seem to be getting it wrong all the time. What's the correlation? And so when you are on that green arrow, traveling life in a way that's true to this natural element of yourself, we call it your ID, you perform best, you're most fulfilled, you get a great sense of achievement, your self-esteem, self-worth, self-confidence are all at their best. And on top of that, physically, your health and your energy is optimized. So there are some people who will say, I'm working 18 hours a day, but I'm having a blast. And I'm supposed to be tired. I mean, maybe I'm running on adrenaline, but I'm just like, I've just got energy to burn. And there's other people who get a great night's sleep, maybe not a great night's sleep, but they've slept 8 hours, and that by 10 o'clock they're falling asleep, or they get through the weekend, they spend all weekend sleeping to try and rejuvenate for the next week. And they're like, I don't know what's wrong with me. I'm always tired. And so there's a correlation between the mind and the body, that when the mind is true to itself, the body fires up, and conversely as well. So that's what the green arrow shows. And that's really what people are chasing in their life. All of us are looking for relationships and roles that allow us to shine and thrive. Thrive is the word. So many companies have been measuring engagement. And frankly, a lot of them are getting really tired of that concept, because there's employees who are engaged but not thriving. And what we want personally and for our teams are to have them thriving. And so that's that green arrow. But there are forces that pull us off track. And that's what those arrows off to the left and to the right mean, that when you're born, like you said before about having twins, the minute you saw they were girls, there's a stereotypical set of expectations out there that says, oh, in that case, you'll want this colored bedroom, they'll have these types of toys, and so it goes through life, that in a family, it's like, well, if you're a boy, you'll do these things in the family. If it's a girl, it's this, same in a relationship. At school, teachers will say, I'm giving you these assignments at the start of the term, so you've got plenty of time to plan and get yourselves organized, because people who rush and leave things to the last minute, they make mistakes, they don't do their best work. But there are people who are wired, their ID is to actually perform best under pressure. And so they will literally forget about assignments and homework and so on until Sunday night or the end of the term or whatever it is. And then in that scurry of last minute, they quickly and cram to get things done. But ironically, they aren't getting a really good mark. But they're left with this guilt of feeling like, oh yeah, but I didn't do it the right way, the proper way, because I didn't do it the way Dad said, the teacher said, my wife or husband said. And so there can still be a friction in the relationship, even though the performance was really good. And so because we want love and we want to belong and we want to, not have disharmony in our lives, we can still, even though we were successful, we still then try and change yet again to please people and get that love. And yet it takes us off track with the best way of performing. And as you said, even with your twins, same kids, same parents, same kitchen table values. And yet, as you've already experienced at 10 years of age, they're so completely different.
For sure. Yeah. So let's go back a little bit to your origin story here. Financial services business doesn't scream IO psychologist. So one, I think it's awesome. I think oftentimes people who do good things in a field, regardless of whatever field they're in, are the people who aren't classically trained in that field, right? They're asking questions in a way that is different and coming from a place of genuine interest and curiosity that generally is able to create higher levels of innovation because of that. So I'd love for you to just talk about that aspect. And did you, like, so moving from financial services to this like curiosity and this passion towards helping people identify this, what did you do to kind of create this and immerse yourself in creating a psychometric assessment tool?
Well, it's a good question, and look, I often ask myself the same question, like, why me? There are plenty of people before me that were much smarter than me that could have, gone left when I went where I went right. I mean, they went down the nurture path, and I was fanatical about going down a nature path, but not because I had a predetermined belief. I just saw. I've always been someone that chases, I guess, where I see the proof, where I see the value. Like, I saw the evidence that this was lining up, and especially from people that lived their life, But, what I would say to people about my journey that might be relevant to them too, and answering your question at the same time, most people look for their purpose in life, their calling, or what I often say to people is find what fascinates you. And chase what fascinates you. When you walk past the television and there's something on it and you can't help but stop and turn and you get immersed in the story, that's maybe a bit of a clue that topic fascinates you. And for me, I have been fascinated all of my life by why people do things the way they do. That's just me. There's no training to that. It's just what's happened to me. Some people are fascinated by horses. Some people are fascinated by cars. I'm fascinated by human motivation. And I mean, why do people do that? Like, when someone finally loses weight and they've been trying to lose weight for 20 years and they say, but there was a moment, like, I believe things happen in moments. And so, like, what was the thing that someone said or the thing that happened to you that made you go, that's it, I'm done, I'm losing the weight, and you just didn't have an issue with it, or you changed jobs, or you changed relationships and put up with all that stuff and eventually went, you know what, I'm done, we're getting divorced, and nothing would turn you around. What is that? That's what I mean by the fascination that I had. And so in financial services, whilst I was dealing with money, I was in a particular field of what's called succession planning, helping business owners transition from one generation to the next typically. And when you talk to most business owners, and particularly in family businesses, they'd say things like, oh yeah, well, what's going to happen is, me and my wife, we've got 5 years left and we've got this plan where my oldest son here, meet David, he's 30 years of age, he's done a business degree, and he's going to be taking the business over. And I'd meet David and I just think, like, instinctively, I just think to myself, there is no way this is going to work. But because he was the son, because he was the oldest, because he'd done the business degree and had, 5 or 10 years experience in the business, the logic of it said, he's the guy. And then they'd introduce their daughter, who was, 24 and, part-time in the business or whatever. But I'd look at her and think, that's the person that should be in charge. Like, she's got whatever it is, she's got it. And I remember being fascinated by, that difference and thinking, if I put the financial plans in place to transition this family from one generation to the next, and it's all based on logic, and we don't pay attention to whatever this human element is that's going to make the finances a success or a failure, I could be destroying that family, And I'm like, is someone having the real conversation here? Like, someone needs to tell David, you are not going to work out. And someone needs to go to Mary, the 24-year-old, and say, hey, Mary, have you actually thought about taking this business on? And let's have that conversation. So I found that I just couldn't resist. My fascination was compelling. So I would have the conversation. And I'd go to David and say, hey, David, do you really want this? And he goes, no, but Dad's got his heart set on it. And I don't want to break Dad's heart. So I've got to do it, And I'm like, oh, but if Dad didn't want you to do it, would you be up for that conversation? He'd go, well, yeah, but I can't have that conversation. So I'd go to Dad and I'd say, Dad, if your son didn't want to do this, I mean, would you still want him to do it? And he'd go, oh, no, I'd never want him to do something that I'm like, let's have a conversation. And I'd bring them all together and I'd put it on the table, and Mum would sort of go and put the kettle on and say, we're finally having the conversation that I've always wanted to have in this family, So that's what sort of
sounds
got
like
me
you
into
just dropped a bomb in the family and walked away, Paul. That's what it sounds like.
Right, no, but we'd have the conversation and they would say thank you because, it finally got the real conversation going. And then I was like, what is it that I'm seeing that was so valuable to that family to have that conversation? And I could see with my intuition that there was a something there in David and a something in Mary, and what I could see it. So I wanted to find out how to figure that out beyond just me doing it intuitively. And that's when I heard about psychometric testing. And so I went and looked at the classic sort of tools and assessments that we all know of that are out there, the Myers-Briggs, the DISC, the Enneagrams, and so on. And whilst I found them being insightful in terms of understanding behaviors and personalities, I was trying to get to, yeah, but what drives you in that moment of making that change in that job or in that relationship, or to lose the weight, or, you know, what is that? What's that natural element in the person? And they weren't getting to that. So I just kept going with my exploration and finally, you know, uncovered the ID.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, hearing you tell that story too about, you know, kind of really feeling the emptiness of, hey, I'm gonna help you plan for the finances of this whole thing, but knowing
Right.
that really if your goal is to set them up for wealth creation, right? Not just wealth protection, but wealth creation, that you know, there are some core foundational fundamental things that need to be in place, or else, you know, you're going to be investing some time and money and effort in the short term that's not going to pay off in the long term. Makes me think about Cloverleaf's origin, because we were initially thinking we were going to be a recruiting company.
Right.
And the more we talked to people in HR, you know, they were like, hey, you know, I don't really need another recruiting tool. Like, you know, there's bazillions of those things out there, and I can go to the Indeeds and the Monsters of the world, and I can go find candidates. But what I see with your product is team building. Like, I've never seen someone give us a perspective or a view on team dynamics the way that you're giving it to me. And it was kind of it was a really aha moment for us to say, like, hey, why would we focus on finding the right fit for a team that might have dysfunctions or maybe isn't operating at its highest level, when we could be focusing on the root, right? The actual culture and the experience
Right.
that people are having in that team. And then, you know, if you're adding people to that and you're helping them identify the right person to add to that team, cool. You know, now you're taking it above and beyond, but like fixing oftentimes what are broken team dynamics really just became logical to us. And it sounds like it was very similar for you, where it's like, hey, the financial services, I'm sure you found, you know, there was fulfillment and a sense of purpose doing that, you know, helping people protect their finances and grow their finances. But that was a much more foundational, fundamental thing that was happening in that, and that can have multi-generational, you know, impact for those people, for that family, and for, you know, the people who found work that really aligned with their natural, you know, strengths and natural energies. So that's awesome. I love that story.